session with Oslo Perl Mongers. We have Brian Defoy here, and uh, with Brian Defoy, uh, we are going to talk a little bit about preparing ourselves for Perl 7. But before we do that, I want to tell you very quickly why I did this. So to do this very quickly, I will ask you to join me in a simple thought experiment. Imagine yourself as something good in your future, something that you think is positive in as many ways as possible. It could be anything, and then ask yourself, what steps need to happen to get there? And maybe repeat that question. What steps need to happen before that? This kind of thought experiment is something I have to admit I run all the time. It's like part of my being. And I would say, I at least guess, I believe that anybody who sees a problem around them and thinks, how can we fix this, might be thinking like that. And how would the Perl community fare in such a thought experiment? That's the question I've been asking myself for a long while now. And I've noticed there's a lot of things to fix. And I've gone through those questions, what needs to happen before this can be fixed or that can be fixed. And at the bottom of that series of questions, I find that there are very few basic things that need to be in place. And one of those things is that there is a sense of excitement or a sense of opportunity, maybe some reason to be happy that we as community members, participants, developers, users are happy to take part of some journey. And when the Perl 7 announcement came last year, I got that feeling. I was thinking, bloody hell, this is really cool. And I think quite a few other people thought the same as myself. Now, afterwards, Brian will tell you a little bit more probably on what happened. But while you keep this in mind, while you listen to him, I want you to keep in mind what if this is a good thing, if Perl 7 or the excitement and the sense of purpose or the reason to be happy to take part in the Perl journey, if that is something you like, think a little bit about what steps needs to happen to get there. And this is one of the reasons I've invited Brian to be with us today, because he has been talking about that and he has been writing about the actual real and concrete steps around what is useful and what is necessary and what is smart to do. Now, some of you might not know Brian. This will be streamed and put on YouTube, so I guess it's in place to say something about him. He is a prolific writer of technical literature. A lot of stuff has come out of his brain and type keyboard on Perl and other interesting topics. He has been doing this for well over 2 decades. And while he is like a cornerstone in the Perl community, I would claim so. I have learned from, let's call them sources, that his skills in speaking Norwegian and Finnish are so bad, he has been told never to do that again. And when he attempts to organize things in Iceland, then mountains explode. So please don't do that either. We like Iceland. So it's not all rosy with Brian. Obviously, his Norwegian and Finnish skills are dangerous. So take that into account next time you bump into him. But luckily, he won't be doing that today. So, and we're not in Iceland, so we're safe. So I will give you Brian. And by the way, afterwards we will have a session with questions and answers. Um, I would like you guys to write your questions in the chat as we're going, and when Brian is done, we'll quickly take a look at it and have our closed session afterwards for those who are participating in the Zoom meeting. All right. Here you go, Brian. I hope the floor is yours. Hey, Brian. Sorry to break up here, but we are actually not getting any sound on YouTube for some reason, which is a major. That's where we're recording, you see. All right. Lots of technical issues today. Oh, this is on my oh, we have good audio in Zoom, but it's picking up the audio from Zoom and sending it, streaming it. That's the problem here. Damn it. Yeah, no, this is all right. Let's here's what we're going to do. Um, what can we do here? Oh yeah, let's see. No, I have monitoring on, so uh, you know what? Here's what we can do. I'll let's spool back for a few minutes. I'll give you the introduction again, but this time we will record it and then I can separately upload it to YouTube. Does that sound good for you? I'm really sorry about this. Thought we had this going here. So if you could spool back your screen. All right. Let's see. to Oslo Perl Mongers meeting with Brian Defoy about Perl 7. We had some technical issues today, but hopefully this will end up as a decent recording on YouTube at some point. Before we move forward with Brian's talk, a few points and a short introduction. I would like just to start out with why we're here and why this is happening. And to do that, I would like you to join me for a quick thought experiment. Imagine something good in your future, anything that you think will be positive, and then ask yourself, what's the steps need to happen before you get there? And maybe the steps before that, what needs to happen before those steps need to happen. And those kind of thought experiments is something I have to admit keep going. Those happen all the time in my mind. And I believe that anybody who sees a problem around them and thinks, how can we fix this? I think thinks in this way, not actively perhaps, but has a part of the way of working, and I'm certainly like that. And when I apply this to the Perl community, how I think the Perl community fares in an interesting way when doing a thought experiment like that. There's a lot of things to fix, and if when I've asked myself what needs to be in order, what needs to be done in order to fix something, and I go through that cycle and I iterate the question, I kind of end up that one of the first steps need to be that there is that we need like a sense of excitement or something that brings us together, or a sense of opportunity, or a reason to give us that we are happy to take part in this Perl community journey. And when the Perl 7 announcement came last year, I got that feeling. And then I have to ask myself, are there anybody else who thought this was awesome? Is that this is a step in the right direction? It might be only a first step, but it creates excitement and opens for new opportunities. What steps need to happen in order for this thought process to continue? What are the next few steps? If Perl 7 is a good thing, how can we reach it? And this is why I've invited Brian today to talk about Perl 7. But before he starts with his presentation, I guess some of you might not know who Brian is. So I'll quickly give the absolute minimal introduction, and that is Brian is I would call him a cornerstone in the Perl community. He has been writing books and other technical literature and giving classes and much more for well over 2 decades. While I don't see him that often at conferences, much less than I'd hope so, he is still very visible online and many other places. With that said, I have learned from sources that, let's call them sources with scare quotes, that his skills in speaking Norwegian and Finnish are so horrible that he has been told never to do that again. And when he attempts to do things, organize Perl events in Iceland, mountains explode. So let's avoid those two things, Brian. And I give now the floor to you. And after the presentation, we'll have some Q&A based out of the questions that pop up in the chat from our attendees in the Zoom meeting. Brian, the floor is yours. getting any sound here. So the people are just saying, yeah, I can hear you, but we're not getting it. It's not being recorded in. On Zoom, it's brilliant, but the recording software doesn't get it for some reason. Okay, all right.
Uh, well, at the same time, it lights a fire under the asses of a lot of people in P5P. So we quickly get 5.7 released. And this is on the track to get us 5.8, which is really where most of the world is in terms of their Perl competence. They learned Perl a long time ago, around that time, and that's what they know. So not only now do we have this Perl 6 effort going on, but we have this Perl 5.8 effort going on. We thought that Perl 5.6 might be the last version, but not really. And now we have two tracks, and it's mostly fine. There's enough people to work on both of them. The people who want to work on the Perl 6 thing are doing their thing. The people who want to work on the Perl 5 thing are doing their thing. I think that's mostly led by Jarkko Heintinimi at that point. Uh, and then this really sort of weird thing happens. Both projects slow down, and it's not because we had two projects. I mean, some people might think that, but there were a lot of interest around both of them. On the Perl 6 side, and this is a thing that people don't talk about too much, is it was just a really toxic setup. The people involved had a lot of issues with each other, and it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. It's just they weren't working well together. Uh, and then this idea comes in for this thing called Parrot. It was a joke. It started off as a joke, and I think Simon Cousins is the guy who originally made it. They're going to make this VM that anything in the world can compile down into Tickle, Python, Perl, whatever. And they started thinking a lot about that and not that much about Perl 6. At the same time, Perl 5 is really stagnating. We're not going to get 5.10 until about 5 years later. That's a huge slowdown in the progress that we'd seen before, even when it was sporadic. Um, and then it's not until Audrey Tang comes into the scene and makes a Perl 6 compiler based on Haskell that the Perl 6 effort picks up again. There's some various other issues in there, but that goes for a while, and it sort of dies out. She goes off and does other things. She's actually now the digital minister for Taiwan. She's been in the news quite a bit lately. Uh, Larry and Damien have other interests, and they're exploring those. And there's this joke in the Perl 6 development that you're going to have it by Christmas. And it was funny for the first few years, but then uh, that joke turned into, what are you going to get first, Perl 6 or Duke Nukem? And I'm not a gamer, but I guess that game was delayed quite a bit. So eventually we get Perl 6 in 2015. This is 15 years after they started. Um, and it's not completely done, but it's usable and it's there and it works to the extent that it does. But Perl 5, in the meantime, has sort of gotten his act together. Jesse Vincent came in, and also Rick came in, and they set policies in place. We're going to have yearly releases. We're going to have monthly point releases or development releases leading up to these things. If things aren't done by a certain time, they don't make it in, and so on. The interest in Perl 5 is a little bit reinvigorated. We have a way to do this thing. We know when the next thing's going to show up. And by the way, the next release is going to be 534 in May. We know this because we have this schedule. We have this process for doing this. And that's what they've announced. But we get to the point now where we're at 530 or 532 or something like this. And again, we're wondering, how did we lose what we wanted to get in 2000? Their situation is basically the same pressures that we had in 2000 with these people sitting around the table in this room talking about this stuff. Um, those problems are still there. We've just been carrying them forward. That we've made yearly releases doesn't help any of that stuff. So some people start talking about what happens if we make a next major release of Perl. And it doesn't matter what the number is. It could be 7, it could be 5,000, it could be something. We can't use 6 though, because that has all this Google foo for this other thing that happened that turned into Raku. So all those pressures are still there. We still want to reinvigorate the Perl community. We want to make the code base cleaner. We want to do all these particular things, responding to these externalities that are out there. But we know from the history of Perl 6 and what happened there that our big moonshot didn't pay off as quickly as we wanted it to. We made a lot of excitement, and then we didn't deliver for, you know 15 years. We can't have that happen again. We don't have 15 years to do this. And so the thought was, well, what if we take what we have now and make it the next major version? Now, there can be some benefit to that. Some people think that there should be major features. There's another group that thinks just getting the code base in line so you can actually have 7 there or whatever number instead of 5 is going to be a big task. And it turns out that it is. Uh, so that's basically what Sawyer, who was a Perl Pumpkin last year, proposed. Let's do something that's really easy, that's not going to get us bogged down, that's not going to take 15 years, and we can make this major bump. Uh, People are used to things changing when the big number changes. So let's go with that. We'll be quick. It'll be out the door. We'll be able to deliver it. We won't have to make a bunch of big promises, and we're not going to have to wait on things that might take forever. Um, that's a really interesting goal. I think that's what some people are missing when they think about this. Why would I get something that's just a different number? But anyway, I hope that history helps a little bit. So there are some goals with this, and if you want to learn much more about this, go find Sawyer's talk. I think it's on YouTube from the Perl conference from last year. He breaks down Perl into markets, and this is what marketing departments do. What segment of customers do we have, or that, and what do they want? And there are a few different things. There are people who are using Perl and they're stuck on whatever Perl their vendor gives them. Red Hat, I think, gives you 5.16. A lot of things give you something that's much later. Um, they don't really care what the current version of the Perl is. They're just taking the Perl that they're given. Okay, so they don't particularly have as much at stake with a new version. So what if we disconnected that segment from another segment, which is right there on the bleeding edge? As soon as you say that there's a new point release or a new monthly release, they're installing this and they're trying things out. So if we give this thing a new major version, we can separate what we've had to do in the past to satisfy those people who aren't staying up to date and also satisfy those people who want to move faster. Along with that, most of the internet is used to the fact that if you change the big number, there is a different social contract. Um, you can stay with what you have. That works just fine. And part of this idea was that Perl 5 would continue to be supported for an extraordinary long amount of time, say like a decade. I'm not making any promises, but something longer than the 2 years that we've committed to now. Uh, and this other thing can move forward. And as I said in all that history, that goal was let's have it now, let's deliver, let's not repeat the problem we had with Perl 6 in biting off more than we can chew, getting distracted by side projects, getting distracted by features that are going to take forever to figure out. We have something now, we can fix up some of the code base, and just getting something delivered would be a huge win. As Sal said, this is one of the most exciting things that we've seen in Perl for a long time, not just in terms of my perception and my opinion, but in the response we got on Reddit, the response we got on Perl.com, the response we got in tweets. A lot of people engaged with those messages. And we haven't seen that with anything else in the past year, or maybe even the past 5 years. So that's where we are with that. Um, there are some challenges though. So even when we want to do something very modest like this, there are some things we have to figure out, such as, well, with this new thing, what does it actually run? Will it only run the new code, or will it be backward compatible with Perl 5? And there's various arguments around that. I'm not going to take sides. Uh, that is a challenge. Now, along with that, what do the various distros do? What is Debian going to do? What is Ubuntu going to do? What is well, Mac OS is just going to remove it completely, so we know what they're going to do. But what are these people going to do? And when someone uses Perl, if they just say PERL at the command line, what do they get? So we have to figure that out too. Then people have to figure out, the users have to figure out, okay, there's now these two things. Which one do I decide to use? Let's say they're both separate. One is called, PERL 5 and one is called PERL 7. They have to decide which one they want to use. I could say, I'm going to stay stable with my distro, or I'm going to be on the bleeding edge. Um, uh, I don't know. That's really up to them. But when we're thinking about this, these are all things we have to take into account. And there's been lots and lots of discussion around these things. I'm optimistic that we can figure out all these things somehow. Um, because they're hard doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't think about them. So where are we now? So it's been very interesting. Since the Perl conference, Perl 5 porters got together and said, well, so far we've had one person sort of steering the development, and it's not been that big of a deal. There hasn't been major decisions like jumping to a major version. Maybe we should rethink that. So we spent the time between last summer and about January forming this thing called the Perl Steering Committee. Now there's 3 people who are fulfilling that role, and they're going to get together and they're going to talk about the topics and the major challenges. They're going to think about the direction they want Perl to go. And uh, so far, they're just getting started. So they don't quite have an answer for us yet. But given some time to get set up, they've only been acting as a Perl steering committee for about a month. Now, since we didn't get to Perl 7 in the 6 months to a year that we initially thought we would last summer, the backup plan was always just, we'll just release 534 and keep going until we have an idea what we're doing. So that's what we're doing now. 534 is going to be released in May. There are a few minor changes in it so far. One of the most interesting is that you can use the 0 little o notation for octal numbers. So you're used to 0x for hexadecimal and 0b for binary. Now you can use 0o. Maybe if we push hard enough, we'll get 0d for decimal numbers too. And so far, again, because the steering committee is just getting going, there's no word on Perl 7. There hasn't been a change of direction, but there also hasn't been a rejection of the direction. We don't know what we're going to get. We don't know what the particular features in that are going to be, but the basic idea is the same. We want to deliver something fast and something easy that gets us the big marketing win. That gives us a chance to reset the social contract. But at the same time, we want to be very careful about what expectations we're passing on to users and what we're going to force them to do. There are a variety of ways we can break things. One way is that we can change a setting that they're used to. Like if they have never had warnings on or strict on, and all of a sudden strict is on, and they can't turn it off, well, now they can't use their code. But I think for the most part, if we do that sort of thing, we're going to be able to say, hey, you just have to say no strict or something like that. Again, that's all speculation. That's a different sort of breakage than completely removing something, say like bare word file handles or prototypes. If we do that, there's no chance for them to run their code on what's next. So the modest change, I think, would be much more easier for the community to digest. Now, along with that, when Sawyer made this announcement and I wrote the article for Perl.com on this, I quickly threw together a book called Preparing for Perl 7. Now, this book is not telling you how to code in Perl 7. Perl 7 doesn't exist. We don't know what's in it. But we have a lot of ideas about what you might need to do to make your code ready or as close to ready as possible for that. First is make sure it runs on the current version of Perl. If you're doing things like having an unescaped left brace in your code because you're still on something before 526, you're going to have to go fix that. AutoConf had this problem in release 526. We reverted that change in 530 and now, 528, and now it's back in 530. So those sort of issues you can catch just by updating to the latest version. This is also the chance for you to think about using all the best practices that you'd expect from modern Perl, like putting strict warnings in your code and things like that. If you're using features that have long been deprecated, get rid of those. And it's curious, people are still trying to use features that were deprecated in Perl 5.0. Just this week, there was a question on Stack Overflow about resetting the initial index for the array. You know, we have that, is it $pound? Is that the operator or the special variable? It's one of those. Someone will correct me in the chat. But there's a special variable that you can set the value of the first index for an element in a list or an array, excuse me. People are still trying to do these things, and they're going to keep trying to do these things. So let's just take it away from them completely. And actually, we might have actually removed that in one of the recent editions of Perl. So I know that's disappointing to come to this talk and not to have Perl 7 actually delivered to you and to know what features are going to be in it. But I think it's very valuable to know why this thing is sort of being managed like it is, what the backstory is, uh, how we have to avoid the major embarrassment that we had in not delivering Perl 6 when we thought we would have it, in the next year, um, no matter why that was. Uh, so